and welcome to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm Randy Karraker. Great to have you with us, and it's always great to talk sports with you. This week, we're going to visit with our friend Jeremy Rutherford. He covers the St. Louis Blues for The Athletic. Also later in the show, Brian Walton of the Cardinal Nation. We're going to talk about the Cardinal minor league system and how they're doing in 2023. But let's get things started with Jeremy Rutherford, veteran coverer of the St. Louis Blues and all sports in the St. Louis area. Always good to see you.
Great to be here, Randy. Good to see you.
And what a fun job you had in 2022, 2023 covering the St. Louis Blues. He covers a Stanley Cup in 2019, team that had a chance to win the Stanley Cup before COVID hit in 2020. This was kind of a different year for people who cover the Blues.
Yeah, I was going to say, did I sense a bit of sarcasm there in that comment? It was a tough year, and a year, Randy, that nobody predicted. You're talking about a 28-point fall off in the standings. I remember at The Athletic, we had a projection model that said the Blues would come in at about 92 points, and people were upset. People said, 92, you're not giving this team enough credit for what they did last year and what they have coming back. And here we see that the Blues weren't even near a 92-point team.
You had some great coverage of the postseason, and I thought the most notable quotes were from the veteran players like Justin Falk and Braden Shen in talking about how the team was really disconnected from the top. And we always hear from winning teams about how connected they are and how they sacrifice for each other. And it seems like this team never really got into that mode.
Yeah, and there were signs of that early on in the season. You heard kind of some rumblings about contracts given out to young players, and are those players working hard enough? You have some veterans on the team like Ryan O'Reilly, Vladimir Tarasenko. O'Reilly would like to be back. Now that money is going to the younger guys, which everybody understands. You're happy for a player when he gets paid like that, but you also want to see that work ethic. So, what was going on in the locker room, I think, was a question early on. And then you get into the season and you just see that they're not coming together as a team. And I think you get to those exit interviews and you're hoping that you're going to get some true, honest answers from guys like Justin Falk and Braden Shen, and boy, did they deliver. Justin Falk coming out and saying, I think we lost some of our professionalism within that locker room, which bleeds onto the ice. And Braden Shen said, playing for yourself, not playing for a team. So some of the things that we suspected ended up being true.
The old independent contractor comment that Doug Armstrong made when he fired Mike Yeo a few years ago comes into play. And I guess one of the concerns has to be Jordan Kyrou. And I know he was a target, and he did have 37 goals. He wasn't terrible, but he is a guy that you have allotted a lot of your salary cap to over the next 8 years. And when you make that sort of a deal with a player, he needs to turn out to be great.
He definitely has to. I think if you look at the situation, Jordan Kyrou is 24 years old, and to put up 37 goals this year, that's exactly what you want to see. I mean, you draft a guy in a second round and he puts up those type of numbers. You got to be happy with the scouting staff, the coaching staff, the player, everything. But going back to that work ethic, you want to see that. You want to see a guy who sees his own shortcomings. He's aware of them. He works on them. He stays after practice. He doesn't have to do it for us. He doesn't have to do it for the media. Do it for himself. But his teammates notice that, pick up on that. So you look at Jordan Kyrou's situation. Randy, a lot of people say, why pay him so early? Why give him that $65 million contract when you did Doug Armstrong? And the situation is, you have to pay some of these young players based on that projection that they're going to be that type of player, or else you have a situation like Matthew Tkachuk in Calgary. He goes to the team and says, look, you don't have to trade me. It's not a trade request, but I'm not going to sign long-term here. So the Flames had to move him. That could have been a situation with Jordan Kyrou. That's why you get the deal done early.
And Doug Armstrong, in his end-of-season press conference, didn't mention Kyrou by name, but it appears as if the Blues, the other guy they gave the contract to, Robert Thomas, are pretty comfortable with where that contract is headed. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that he's a worker, Robert Thomas, and I think you could say that it was a bit of a step back from him. Points were down a little bit. I know he was banged up, but I think that he's taken on that number one center role from Ryan O'Reilly the past couple years, more so this year, especially after O'Reilly left. And the faceoff number is up 52%, still makes some dazzling plays, right? So I think with Robert Thomas, you look at a player who's definitely on the ascension.
One of the other things that among many, by the way, that happened for the Blues in 2022, 2023 was just a complete failure of the defense. And I know there's a lot of people, the reaction to your grades story about Jordan Binnington that are down on the goalie, but it really I think for a lot of observers and a lot of people in hockey that were paying attention to this team on a regular basis, it started with the defense. The goals against problems started with the defensemen.
It definitely did, and it's a bit surprising. Maybe some people say, no, it wasn't surprising. They don't like the construction of the defensive roster. But you look at last year in the playoffs against Colorado, they did a great job. Minnesota against Kirill Kaprizov, guys like that, they're playing well. Nick Leddy comes in and does well against a star player. But then you come into this season, same thing. First 3 games of the year against the Edmonton Oilers, they have that 2-0 shutout win. McDavid does nothing. So it looked like it was going to be, okay, I think this defense can hold its own. But Randy, it just fell apart after that. And that was the #1 problem for the Blues this season. So many wide open slot shots for the opponents, so many backdoor tap-ins. And eventually you just got to a point where there was no confidence in that defense.
Are those schematic issues that can be fixed within this group, or do the Blues need to get different guys?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that they need to be a lot more aggressive with their system. I think sometimes when you're sitting back, it just allows those players to do whatever they want to do in the offensive zone. But we asked Craig Berube that question, Randy, and one of his comments was, and I agree with it, you got to have the want. You got to have the want in that group. So you can do something scheme-wise and change things going into next year scheme-wise, but if you don't have the players who are going to be aggressive, be assertive, jump on loose pucks. Colton Parayko made a comment after the year. He said he thought he was thinking too much, and that makes you a half step late. We can't have that. There's a guy that's a veteran in the league, Justin Falk, Torrey Krug, a little bit banged up. He's got to be a lot better. Nick Leddy. If this top 4 defense comes back, Randy, they have to be so much better.
Well, and one of the things about that word, having the phrase, having the want, if you are 32 years old and you've never been banged up before, then you get the contract and then you get banged up, maybe things change a little bit. Maybe there is a comfort level that's where you're saying, you know what, I've got my money, I've had a really good career, and I've got a few years left. I just want to be on the ice. Maybe the want, and I'm not saying that this is the case, I'm just saying it certainly feels like a distinct possibility. Maybe the want dissipates a little bit because you've got everything that you need.
It really could, and it's hard to read guys' minds, just like it's hard to read Jordan Kyrou's mind with that big contract and what's going through his head. But I think you're right. I think defense is such a big part of the game that requires that want, because it's not sexy to want to go jump in front of a shot or go chase a guy into the corner and try to come out with a puck. And we're not just talking the defensemen here too, the forwards included. They needed to do a better job, I think, this season helping out the defense, which they did not do. But you're right. I think when you've been banged up, when you got the contract, are you doing those small things that make the team collectively good defensively?
There's 2 more players I want to ask you about before we move on to what the Blues need to do next year. Number 1, I thought from the first time I saw him that Pavel Buchnevich was the most talented player the Blues had. But he's hurt all the time. And I'm wondering if he can ever be what the Blues, I don't know what they expect of him, but what he should become with the talent level that he has.
I think he can, and I agree with you. I think he's one of the most talented, if not the most talented player on the roster, and kind of a unique injury where he's got the infection with the ankle. And he was telling us after the season that it hurt to put the boot on, and so he was dealing with something that I think not a lot of us have ever dealt with before, and so he's playing as much as he can, but the injuries did start to pile up, take him out of some games, and could never really become, I think, that player that they needed him to become for the whole season. Like he did it for the games that he was in, 63, and he still scored some goals. But Randy, also, they're trying to look at him at the center position, and who knows if he'll be a center come the start of next season. But I think, that takes you out of your element too, just a position that he hasn't played.
And sometimes the last player I want to talk about is Jordan Binnington. We look at athletes, and we look at stats, and we don't consider circumstances. Sam Bradford never had a number 1 receiver, never had a left tackle to play quarterback. He got beat up, he got killed. You look at pitchers that they allow all kinds of soft contact, but it's just getting through. I think Jordan Binnington, as much as any athlete, was a victim of circumstances this past season.
I really do. And I don't want to take Jordan Binnington off the hook whatsoever. There's a stretch that he did not play good hockey. Craig Berube himself said it, that he was a bit up and down there for about a month. Some goals that you'd like to not see go in were going in. But I think you're right. I think if you look at the percentages, the slot shots, the backdoor tap-ins, the defensive play this year, I think that Jordan Binnington just got to a point where he couldn't do it all. And so you can look at the stats from the last 4 or 5 years, and there's definitely a steady decline in his save percentage, and all the analytics also show that the stats aren't good. But when you look at Jordan Binnington's season this year, I'm focusing on this year, to me, throw the stats out the window, because I think that he was a guy who gave you a fighting chance, and he took it up until the point of the season where where the season was lost, Randy, and then what's he supposed to do at that point? Once you've made your bed with your defensive play and where you are in the standings, what else is he going to do?
And realistically speaking, he wasn't going to get better than he was in 2019 either.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to do that. But I do think that when you look at the play in the bubble, Jordan Binnington, that was not great.
It was a disaster.
It was a disaster. So I think he started to get that, one-hit wonder label at about that point. And if you're not watching the games on a nightly basis, if you're a national observer and you watch this season and you just looked at the numbers, you didn't see the games night in and night out, you say, okay, well, I was right about that one-hit wonder. When I think a lot of people, our own Darren Pang here in St. Louis will tell you that he was better than his numbers this year.
That's Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. Coming up, where do the Blues go from here? We'll talk about it on the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm Randy Karraker, Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic with us, talking some Blues hockey. And JR, we've already discussed where the Blues have been in 2022-2023. Now they have 3 first-round draft choices after disassembling their Stanley Cup championship team. If you're in the position of Doug Armstrong, how do you utilize those 3 first-rounders?
Well, I think with their situation, you have the number 10 overall pick, unless you move up, right? You got a 3.5% chance to get that number 1 overall pick. Obviously, you know who you'd take in that case, Connor Bedard. But then you have the latter 2 first-round picks that you got from the Rangers and you got from the Toronto Maple Leafs. Doug Armstrong said the other day that he would be shocked if he weren't going to the stage for that number 10 pick in Nashville to make that selection. And I agree with him. The Blues haven't had that high of a selection. You can't move that. Even if you can find a player out there, I think you have to make that pick. But then with the later 2, you can do anything you want. You can package both of them and try to move up. Can you get another top 10, top 15 pick with those 2 first-round picks? Or can you take those 2 picks and find that player in that 26, 27-year age range like he did with Vrana, like he did with Kapanen, and add that player to the core here? But what he says is he wants some term. You want 2-3 years on a contract if you're bringing in a player like that. So multiple different options, but I think Doug Armstrong, he has never had this before, so he's looking forward to it.
And historically, of recent vintage, the Blues have been a team that spends to the cap, but they've already almost done that for next year, right? There's not an awful lot to do in free agency for the Blues.
Yeah, there's really not. They have about $6.7 million projected cap space going into next season. That's as we sit here today, according to Cap Friendly. Not a lot of space. I still go back to that comment Doug Armstrong made after the Ryan O'Reilly trade, and you're moving on. And he said, well, we have $4.2 million in cap space at that time, he said. And I looked and said, is he making a plea to Ryan O'Reilly to come back in the offseason? So also he did say that they're not going to name a captain, Randy, and he said, I know we won't for the next couple months. Well, guess what's in a couple months? Free agency could bring Ryan O'Reilly back. So I think they need a top 9 forward. He or somebody else could fit that, but we'll have to see what they do with the draft with those picks.
So as we wrap up here, our friend Ken Hitchcock always had a line that I loved. He talked about people like Schwartz and Alexander Steen as being the conscience of the team, right? They would play both ends of the ice. They both played really good 200-foot games. And the 2 guys that were really good at that particular aspect of the game. There aren't as many of those guys running around now as there were then. We heard Doug Armstrong's comments at the end of the season about how a player now thinks that he had a good night if he has an 18-second viral video that gets 1 million views, but we want to know how we can get 18 minutes rather than 18 seconds. So with the limited cap space and with where the Blues are, we've talked about the young players, it seems to win, you need those guys. Are those guys here, or do the Blues need to find new ones that do that are conscious of the team guys?
Yeah, I think they definitely could use another one for sure. You lose a guy like Schwartz a couple years ago. You lose Oscar Sundqvist is another guy
great call,
who fits that mold. Of course, Alexander Steen. So they definitely need that type of guy. I think with some improvement and with some experience, maybe Robert Thomas can become that guy. I know he really wants to become that guy, but it's going to take some work defensively for him to do that. But I think with this St. Louis Blues team, yes, they've shown in the past that they do need a guy like that, but but it just needs to be more collective as well. Like Doug Armstrong has said in the past, they're not paying superstars. They're paying a lot of guys handsomely to be good players, and they just didn't get that from that group next year. So, yeah, if you can go get a solid two-way player, but it's going to cost you, right? And probably the Blues aren't in that situation. But I think all around, offensively, defensively, it's got to be a better team effort to get what you're talking about.
Your work at The Athletic is tremendous. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you being with us tonight.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks a lot, Randy.
It is Jeremy Rutherford. If you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, by the way, just go to theathletic.com. You won't get any better coverage than you get from Jeremy Rutherford and his colleague, Katie Wu, covering the Cardinals as well. Coming up, we're going to talk, speaking of the Cardinals, about their minor league system with our friend Brian Walton of the Cardinal Nation. He is next on the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm Randy Karraker, and it's always good to talk Cardinal minor league baseball with the preeminent minor league expert regarding the Cardinals. It's Brian Walton of the Cardinal Nation. Brian, always good to see you. Thanks for your time tonight.
Hey, it's a pleasure to join you, Randy.
Well, let's start with this. The Memphis Redbirds are hot. The Cardinals have promoted a lot of players over the course of the last 12 months. Nolan Gorman, Alec Burleson, Lars Nootbaar is up here. A lot of good offensive players have made their way from Memphis to St. Louis, yet Memphis is really hot. Why are the Redbirds so hot?
Well, as you mentioned, they've had a 12-game winning streak that was just snapped, first place in the International League West Division. And last year, Memphis was successful with their bats. And we saw, of course, a lot of those bats come up to St. Louis. But Moises Gomez, for example, led the minor leagues with 39 home runs. This year, the offense at Memphis is more the middle of the pack, say 12th-ish in batting average, OPS. But the pitching, the Memphis Redbird pitching is number one in the 20-team International League with an ERA right at 3.4. And that is, exceptional pitching in a league where there's a lot of very, very good hitters. And the way that they're doing that is by minimizing walks. It sounds so simple, and we, repeat it so many times, it sounds like a cliche, but the Memphis Redbirds have issued the fewest walks in the International League, and that is enabling them to put up together this fine record that they're off to this year.
Brian, I want to touch on some of the position players that are still in the Cardinal system, and the guy that we've heard the most about and we saw in spring training is Mason Wynn. How is his start to his AAA career going?
Well, Mason Wynn, has been in parallel. He's part of that great 2020 draft class that included Jordan Walker and Tink Hence. And Mason Wynn, it's probably unfair that he's being judged as sort of, parallel to Jordan Walker in terms of progress, because, of course, Walker's ascension has been so dramatic, so fast. But Wynn is getting his first experience at AAA. He's striking out a high 25%, batting average around 200. So he's got some more work to do. But he has stolen 8 of 8 bases. His legs are a key part of his game. And defensively, interestingly enough, part of it was Paul DeYoung was there in his rehab, but Mason Wynn has been playing second base in addition to shortstop, and I think that's important for him as a young player. When he does reach St. Louis, there may not be a starting job there day one, so you need to be versatile to be able to play around the infield and get your bats and get your starts wherever you can. And again, barring any injuries, Mason Wynn is a 2024 St. Louis player.
And one other player I wanted to touch on here with you is a guy that I've heard about in talking to players, and I think it's as much because he was a first baseman at TCU, and Matt Carpenter was a first baseman at TCU. But Lucan Baker is a mammoth guy. He's a huge man, kind of a Paul Bunyan-esque guy who's actually put up some good numbers early on for Memphis. What sort of, and it's not like the Cardinals are going to be looking for a first baseman anytime soon, but what do you envision Lucan Baker becoming?
Well, Lucan Baker's now 26 years old, so he's kind of, past the big hype stage. He's still in our, top 25 prospect in the system in our mind. But as you mentioned, as a first base only player who's, is kind of a lumbering player, so to speak, but still very good defensively. But he first base and designated hitter is about the only place you can put Luken Baker. He's not going to be an outfielder. And so that means his path to St. Louis is blocked. But you want to have a guy, coming out of TCU, he was known for being able to take a walk, which is unusual for a power hitter. And this is his second year in Memphis. He's kind of that anchor in the middle of the lineup, the guy to drive and run, 6 home runs, 16 RBI in just 21 games. And, has an OPS of around 1,100 and is walking at a career high 20% rate because, of course, other teams are trying to avoid Luken Baker. So he's that really anchor that you want in the center of that Memphis lineup.
Brian, one more guy because I have a moment. And he came up last year. It looked like Ivan Herrera was a little bit overwhelmed. And then the Cardinals go out and spend $87.5 million on a catcher. I don't think they expect that Wilson Contreras is going to be their catcher for 4 years. But has the luster of Ivan Herrera worn off a little bit?
I think that's a very good question, Randy, and it's easy to say, but we forget sometimes that despite us having talked about Ivan Herrera for 3 or 4 years, he's only 22 years old. We're talking about a 22-year-old in his second year at AAA. And yeah, when he was brought up to St. Louis, he was overmatched. He was overmatched offensively, and the Cardinals wanted to see him continue to advance behind the plate. But if you look at what Ivan Herrera has done this year, very quietly, 6 of his 13 hits have gone for extra bases, has a nice 830 OPS, so he's contributing offensively, and he needs to continue to grow defensively. But you'd still like to hope that Ivan Herrera is going to be the long-term solution as the backup catcher, and then maybe get more and more at-bats over time as Contreras gets a little older and maybe DHs a little more.
For people that aren't familiar with the Cardinal Nation, tell us about what people can expect on a daily basis.
Well, we have free reports on every minor league game from the night before posted each morning, so you can read about what's happening across the system, who's going to pitch the next days. And then we have in-depth team reports. We have local-based reporters at each of the minor league affiliates who provide a weekly report on all the happenings behind the scenes in their teams. We document every transaction, every move that occurs across the system. There's new news about the Cardinals minor league system 365 days a year. And we have a prospect guide, 292 pages, lots of detail and over 6 prospects. And for people who are interested in the minor leagues, I think you'll find that the Cardinal Nation has the most comprehensive coverage anywhere.
TheCardinalNation.com. Brian Walton, always good to see you, and we always appreciate your time, and we'll do this as the minor league season unfolds.
You got it, Randy.
Take care. Our thanks to Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic, talking some Blues hockey here on the 101 on Sports, and also to Brian Walton from the Cardinal Nation. And as always, we thank you for tuning in. Until next week, I'm Randy Karraker. Thanks for joining us here on Fox 2.